Okay, let's get started as we're just at the top of the hour here. So thanks for joining us today. My name is Mike Smitherman. I look after sales and marketing over here at Metric Insights. I have Maris Moscovici on with us as well, our founder and CEO. Hi, Maris.
Mike, hello everyone.
So we have a series of sessions over the next few months that are primarily focused around improving your AI and BI initiatives with a bent on governance. And today we're focusing on that hot topic of the application of AI to specifically ask your data type applications that everyone seems to be striving to build these days. And the goal of this session and the series in general is to bring our experience to the table, what we're seeing in the market, the challenges that we see our customers and enterprises that we work with that are having when they embark on these initiatives, and to share the sort of things that you should be considering as you head down similar paths. Um, just some housekeeping things. So, as usual, we are recording this webinar, and the series obviously as a whole. So, those recordings will be available online, and we'll send out links to those. I'm happy to take Q&A via the chat and Q&A windows in the Zoom panel at the bottom. Feel free to enter your questions in there, and we'll circle back to them at the end. Um, I think that's all the housekeeping. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Marius, to kick things off.
Thank you, Mike, and welcome everyone. So we're going to talk about today about the common pitfalls that folks encounter when they're building the AI for BI applications. And this is really, as Mike said, this is pulled together from a lot of the experiences that we've heard from many of our customers, from the folks we've talked about. And it's a little bit of a cautionary tale. It's also gives you hopefully some practical advice for things that you can do in your environment to make sure that your journey to AI for BI is successful. So I'm going to start here with a little bit of a story about Homer's Odyssey. I'm sure many of you have read that or know about the story of Odysseus and the sirens. It's a pretty famous story, right? But for those that may not be familiar with it, there's a part of the Mediterranean Sea. I guess it'd be like the Tyrrhenian Sea at this point, and in there was there was legendary there was legend there was an island where it was inhabited by sirens, and these creatures were would sing when people would navigate, sailors would navigate their boats near the island, and the music, the way they would sing their song was so compelling, so beautiful, so alluring that inevitably the sailors would turn their boats towards the island, and they would crash on the rocks that were underneath the water, and they would perish. So it's certainly a cautionary tale. And Odysseus, in the Odyssey, in Homer's Odyssey, in order to kind of navigate through this area, he forced all of his crew to put beeswax inside their ears so they could not hear the song. And he and also had them lash him to to his boat, to the front of the boat, so that he could not move, could not do anything, so that he could hear the music, the song, but could not respond to it. And doing so, he was able to navigate through that process and get to the other side and successfully continue his journey. So this may seem like obviously is an old story, but in fact it's quite relevant because today there is a siren song of AI to BI. It comes from the fact that in most organizations, the executives out there have been using ChatGPT for some time. They're used to asking questions and getting answers about everything in the world, all kind of world knowledge, from the consequential to the trivial. And they come into their workspace, and they don't understand why they can't do the same thing. They go to their CIOs, their VPs of analytics, and they say, hey, we want to be able to have an AI strategy where we can ask questions of our data and get the same kinds of answers that we can get from our ChatGPT system, but do that in a secure fashion, etc., in a reliable way. So, what tends to happen if you kind of look at what's the path that most people take, a naive path, if you like, is often organizations will look for an easy way to do that. They'll often reach to the kind of a standard sort of chat with your data type tools, maybe what's shipped with Databricks, what comes with Snowflakes, Cortex, Genie, and so forth. They'll quickly build something together, put together a solution, maybe point it to their data warehouse, or and connect it up there. You can do that pretty quickly. Give it a little bit of information on your schema, and then kind of have a really nice demo that you can show, hey, look, I can ask a question. This thing will build a SQL statement behind the scenes. It'll give me the results. You can impress people with a really cool demo, how quickly you put that together. And then there's a lot of enthusiasm for moving forward in that direction, right? So that's very, very typical. But then sort of things typically go south from there, right? And what happens is, the agents that you set up, well, it's connected to a schema that is fairly complex, right? Because enterprise schemas tend to have a lot of tables, a lot of joins, many different ways to get data out. So oftentimes, some questions the agent might get confused and might follow the wrong path. Um, there's no way for users to kind of ground the answers in a way that they would trust. So yes, it's giving you a response, maybe it even shows you the SQL statement, but you're as a user of this content, as a business user, I'm asking a question, then I'm getting back an answer, and I have like maybe a half-page SQL statement that I have no idea what it's saying or whether it's right or not. So I don't know how that information is grounded and whether the information is good or not. So that's a problem. And then the quality levels of what's produced just doesn't meet the user's expectations. Or sometimes the answers are great, and other times it's kind of taken a completely different path and giving you completely incorrect results. You have some hallucination, right? So there's just these disappointments that happen as people get a little closer and start using the system a little bit more. Um, and then, what happens is one of two paths, one of two outcomes occur, both of which are really terrible outcomes. One of which is that either the solution just never gets out of the POC stage, right? People are just disappointed with everything beyond the demo once they start evaluating it, and it just never makes it into production because you can't overcome the quality challenges or performance challenges, or get things to work in a reliable way. Or worse than that, if somebody sort of pushes the button and puts out a low quality solution into production. Maybe it's a federated environment where people can just deploy whatever they want. Something goes out there, and then that just generates, it wrecks your credibility, right? So your ship in this analogy is your credibility, and once that's wrecked, it's very hard to recover it, right? So people believe, well, our team doesn't know how to build these solutions, and we're not going to trust any of the AI solutions that are created. So both of these are really poor outcomes. They're unfortunately not very uncommon. They happen quite a bit. And the rest of this webinar is really about, how do we avoid this? What are the things that you need to think about? How do you put together the right guardrails, the right structure? How do you think about tool technology in such a way that you can make sure that you are creating solutions in the space that are reliable, and that will build your credibility, and so that you can then follow up with more and more expanded capabilities in the space, with a virtuous cycle rather than a spiral of doom. So with that, let's kind of talk a little bit about kind of a high level, and then we'll dig deep into sort of what's involved in not succumbing to the siren song, and in fact navigating these treacherous waters, right? So the first thing is that you want to make sure that when you're going to build a solution, what you do not want is hey, let's just point our AI against our data tables, and then people can ask anything they want, and that's our solution, right? That's not a good use case. I would consider that sort of a lazy use case where I have no idea what my users are going to want to ask. I'm just sort of saying, well, in AI, I don't have to think about that, so I'm just going to, just defer that to production. They can just connect to it and ask whatever they want. While it's true that with AI, you don't need to ask the same thing exactly the same way. You do want to have a very deliberate set of use cases formed in the sense of the types of questions that you want the system to reliably be able to ask and answer. Users should be able to ask those and reliably know that they're going to get good results for those. So coming up with those set of use cases is very important upfront for that, especially for that initial release that you're going to get, right? So that you can start off, deliver something narrow, albeit narrow, but deliver it with very high quality, right? The second thing is that you need to figure out how you're going to leverage the metadata within your ecosystem. So enterprise KPI definitions, definitions for rules, aliases for things where people are going to ask for something different ways. You know, if I ask for ARR or I ask for annual recurring revenue, that might be the same column in the table. So leveraging all the metadata that helps the AI system understand how people are asking questions, which column they should refer to. When we mean sales, we actually mean this column here with this particular criteria, etc. So doing that is very important. And then steerability is very important. So what I mean by steerability is, invariably the very first release or whatever you create won't be perfect. You need to have a mechanism built in such that you can provide the model feedback through knowledge, through guidance, through rules, and have it then steer future questions that get asked so that then you can, over time, continuously improve the quality of what gets produced. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. And then we also equally important is you need to think right from the get-go, how are my users going to be able to verify these results? Since we all know AI systems, even the best of them, will occasionally hallucinate. So you need to have a mechanism by which you can ground the results in a way that then users can verify them. So that could be dashboards that you can connect them to where they can, or reports where they can kind of do the in-depth analysis and potentially validate that the numbers sort of make sense or consistent with what else they're seeing. It could be other mechanisms, but you want to think about upfront what are the ways in which you're going to verify the results that a user can self-verify the results if they doubt whether something is correct or not. And then you need to be able to establish, in advance before you deploy a solution, make sure you've got sort of evaluation and governance capabilities. So what I mean by that is have a set of if you have a set of questions, it could be a few dozen or 100 different types of questions you want to be able to ask, examples of those questions, making sure that you've got an eval framework that tells you whether those are being met, and then governance in the sense that not anybody should be able to publish any AI model out there or any AI chatbot out there without meeting some minimum success criteria. Again, we'll talk about that in depth in a moment. So these are the major things. We'll deep dive into them. But if you put these pieces together, then you've got something that is in fact going to be successful if you've got good technical underpinning to deliver it. So before we do a deep dive into some of these topics, I think it's helpful to understand a little bit about the tool landscape because there are lots of different ways you can put these solutions together. And, if you might want to understand, well, what are my options? What are some of the pros and cons of these options? And that will guide you through your journey. So one solution, the one that I mentioned first, that many people turn to first, is to use the custom-built extensions that are available in the cloud databases. So if you're using Snowflake or Databricks or GCP, you might go out there and use something like the Cortex system in Snowflake, or in Databricks you might use a Genie. And you put together you connect it to a schema and create your solution. And the pros of doing this, your advantages, the reason people do this is it's quite easy and quite fast. In fact, probably in a half a day, you could go into your system with a connection to a model. You could build something with a bot that can answer questions within the system, right? Using the Snowflake UI, for example, or the Databricks Genie UI. So that's the pros. On the con side, there's a few considerations that you want to keep if you're going to think about if you're going to move in this path. One is that you're not going to be leveraging any of the metadata in your enterprise data catalog, right? Now, of course, if you're using like Databricks, you might be able to use the local catalog that's present there. Same with Snowflake, but it's not going to leverage, if you have Alation or Calibra or Atlan, that metadata is not going to be leveraged in the solution. You're going to need to build your own UI if you're delivering this, because unless people are going into Snowflake to consume the information, or Databricks, these systems need to be deployed through some kind of a UI that asks and presents the question. So a chatbot UI has to be built. Um, there are going to be quality challenges potentially here. I had I remember when I was attending Snowflake and the conference, and they proudly proclaimed that they are 90% that across the benchmark that they ran of typical business questions that where people ask their data system, they achieved a 90% accuracy rate. And that sounds very impressive at first glance, but if you think about it, in fact it's probably woefully inadequate, right? Because if you had an analyst in your business that responded to questions from your executive, and 9 out of 10 times they gave accurate answers, and the 10th time they gave completely inaccurate answers, but with a high level of conviction, right? That would probably not be acceptable to you, right? 1 out of 10 chance that you might make a completely wrong decision based on data is not acceptable for most enterprise organizations. People would obviously one out of 10 times saying, "Hey, I don't know how to answer this question," is fine, but giving the wrong answer, definitely not fine. So there are quality issues to consider there, and you need to really delve deep into that. Additionally, generally, you can only ask questions and get back maybe textual responses. So graphical displays are limited in these approaches. And then steerability is also can be a challenge here, as far as like how do you create that virtuous cycle where, as people get good answers, they give it the thumbs up, or if they give it a thumbs down, it's kind of feeding back into the model and improving it. That's a challenge a lot of times in these implementations. So those are some of the things to consider there. Another alternative, and again, this is quite heavily used today, is people will use AI extensions. So Copilot in Power BI is an example of this. Looker has an extension where you can chat your data for Looker dashboard. Tableau has Tableau Next, as well as some Ask Data capabilities in their online Pulse type implementation. Pyramid Analytics has that. There's a number of different vendors. Increasingly, I guess we should expect probably all of the BI tool vendors will have some form of ask your data solution directly integrated into their dashboards, right? And the pros of this is extremely easy to set up. It's literally, just buy the product and then flip a switch to say, if you paid for this capability, you flip a switch to say, make this available via talk to your data type or concierge or whatever, and you can ask a question and get an answer. Um, and it leverages the semantic model that's inside of the tool, right? So if it's a Looker, it's leveraging the Looker ML model. For Power BI, it's the data set semantic model, and so on. So that's an advantage. It's not going directly against the database. It's got the benefit of that model, and any metadata you've encoded in there. The cons of this kind of approach is that oftentimes you have to go to the right dashboard. In fact, most of the time, you have to know which dashboard you got to open in order to ask the question. So that's obviously a minus, in that a user can't just go to one place, ask questions, and get an answer no matter which dashboard that's in. If you have a heterogeneous environment where you have multiple tools, that can be problematic, right? Because you're gonna have different experiences and different tools, and then there can be quality issues there as well, because a user can very easily enable a semantic model for let's say in a Power BI environment, and the dashboard that's built on top of that has a whole bunch of encoded logic where it knows how to properly define key terms and do that. But the semantic model doesn't have all that same logic in it. And then, you run into the problem of when somebody asks a question, they're going to get a different result than they might see in the dashboard. So that's a problem. So that's something you have to watch out for, and it has to be carefully considered, as well as the fact that if there is a whole bunch of metadata, enterprise KPI definitions, other forms of metadata that you have in your enterprise data governance tools, those are again divorced from this experience as well. So you're not leveraging those, and that can affect accuracy. So another alternative is to use native AI solutions, talk to your data solutions. So examples here are tools like Wisdom AI, a tool called Y, another tool called Ren AI. Some of these are built on open source frameworks. Some are built on closed source ecosystems. But in all the cases, they're sort of built from scratch specifically to do conversational analytics. And these have the advantage of being highly steerable because steerability is sort of built in from the front. You can define rules and using English. You can provide sample queries that it should use for certain things. There's multiple layers of steerability. There's a semantic model built into these tools, and they will oftentimes generate visualizations as well. So you can some will use Vega as a charting grammar. Others will use high charts, but they allow you to be able to generate that, so you can do visualizations as well. So those are nice advantages. On the con side, you're looking at new tech that you've got to introduce into the ecosystem. Of course, it is separated from a lot of the other things that you have in your environment. So obviously they're separated from your dashboards and the semantic model that's inside of those. Oftentimes it's separated from your semantic information that's sitting inside of your enterprise data catalogs. Some of these tools do allow you to connect to your enterprise semantic model, so that could be helpful, but some do not. So you have to really look to see if that's possible. And based on the product maturity, based on the vendor and how far along they've been around and how enterprise ready they are, you may get various levels of ability to handle enterprise level security. So row level security constraints, authentication in a way that kind of is uniform across your ecosystem, single sign-on. Some of those things are some tools have quite a bit of that, some do not. So you have to really be very careful and look closely into those areas. And then finally, I mean, I want to highlight the fact that there's also the opportunity to use some legacy, NLP players. These are players that have been around before generative AI existed. So you used to have more structured things like ThoughtSpot typically used a more structured approach to questions, but it was a sort of still a text to SQL approach. And what they've done is they have retrofitted their tools. They have integrated Gen AI into it so that you can then use Gen AI as the interface to accomplish the solution that you were previously had to do in a more structured way inside of their tools. And the pros here is that these tend to be more enterprise-ready platforms because they've been working in enterprise for a long time. They have a built-in semantic model, so your quality can be substantially higher than what you might do if you just go against your database. So that's great. On the con side, there's a vendor lock-in, obviously, because you're working with a player in a space, so that's where you're kind of committing to that direction. They are separate from your dashboards, so now you have kind of another location. You've got what's in the dashboards, and you've got this other system that's sort of sitting side by side with that, so it further fragments your ecosystem. Um, and your semantic model, while there is a semantic model here, you're not necessarily kind of leveraging the semantic model you have in Calibra or Alation or Atlan. You have to bring all the semantics into here and in many ways reconstruct it within their own specific grammar. In some cases, there's interfaces and other things to make that easier, but you want to pay close attention to what does that process going to look like, and is it possible to make that work in an efficient way. So anyway, no perfect one solution here, but as long as you're aware of the alternatives, and the various ways you can approach these and some of the pros and cons, I think you can navigate your way to finding something that is a good fit for your organization and what's important to you. So with that, let's go on to talk a little bit more about just how to do some of the best practices that will guide you through the process independent of technology, right? First one is looking at use cases, right? So what are the things that you want to do what are the keys? What are the checklists that you want to have? What's the checklist you want to have to make sure that you have well-defined use cases? So the first is to have for your initial set of use cases a very specific audience in mind, right? You don't want to say, I'm going to deploy the solution to everyone in the enterprise because different people in the enterprise have different questions that they want to ask. You want to focus on a constituency, your salespeople, if you've got a hotel chain, the folks that are maybe they're managing the properties, or if you're a rental car company, maybe the people doing the rental car. Identify some specific constituency that you're going to serve through the solution that's going to be highly targeted. And then identify what is the data set, what is the data that this constituency really needs on a that where you can create value for them, right? And that's the key thing. The three prongs here are make sure you understand the audience, understand the data that they need to work with, and understand how you can generate tangible value from that data. And what I mean by tangible value, how are you going to answer a question that they don't already have the answer to today? If I'm creating a generative AI system, I'm deploying something where you can ask a question, and that very same question that I'm targeting towards, you can just look at your dashboard to see the answer for. Well, that's a real problem because you're competing with me. You're making me type a question to get and wait to get an answer for something I just click to see the dashboard and get the answer. So it needs to fundamentally be something that is different, or in addition to hard to solve in the dashboard, something that's really useful there for this. The use case has to be well defined and valuable and distinct. That's the key here. Now, if you think about the data set that you're going to work with, right? Because now let's assume you've identified, okay, I've identified my audience. When I work with my sales reps, they need to have their leads and opportunity and current sales information in this data, and this is available in this data set. You need to make sure that your data set is AI ready, right? What does that mean? Well, it needs to be well defined and documented. So you've got metadata at the column level, for both measures and dimensions. It's well structured. There's no ambiguity in the sense that there aren't like three different ways that I can do join paths through the same set of tables to get answers that are slightly different. There's no ambiguity about when I say sales, this is what I mean, right? There's not many different tables that have sales measured slightly differently, but labeled in the same way. So it's very disambiguated, right? And the data has a high level of quality. In other words, there's quality checks when the data comes in. You know that you're loading the right data every time. You know that you have the ability to determine if it is available on time, etc. Because if you talk to your data solution on top of data where half the time the data is low quality, that's obviously, no matter what the model does, it's not going to be able to give you good results. So that's key. Those are all key criteria. And then the final piece, kind of alluding to the last thing, is that data set should be such that it can answer questions that the dashboard cannot. So for example, maybe your sales team has a dashboard that can look at their sales activity, and they can look at what's happening right now with all their opportunities, but they can't easily understand trends or changes that have happened in their opportunities from that dashboard. Well, then focusing on the types of questions that they can ask around their historical trends, that could be useful. Or maybe there are things that are available in those dashboards, but you got to flip around to lots of tabs and try to piece together to do some common actions. I want to be able to figure out like which opportunities are the ones I should focus on right now, which are the ones at risk, things of that nature. And it's hard for me to figure that out from the dashboard. Well, that's a good use case, assuming your data set can easily support it. And so you want to be thinking along those lines. Next, you want to really look at, how do you get to high accuracy? So assuming you've got good data, you've got a good use case. Now, how do you make sure that those questions that are being asked are going to be responded to with a high level of accuracy, right? And here, you want to look at a few things. You want to, first of all, generally speaking, keep the data model simple. So for especially this is the case if you are using like a database-based solution like a Cortex or a Genie, etc. Typically less than 20 tables. And even these more advanced solutions, some of them can scale up to more tables, but largely you want to try, at least initially, focus on a small number of tables, because the fewer tables, the easier the simpler the joining, the less there is likely that the model will go off the rails, right? So that reduces your likelihood of generating poor quality results. Then you want to make sure, again, your table and column data is complete and extensive, right? Descriptions on all the columns, descriptions on how calculated fields, enterprise KPIs defined, etc. And then the other key piece is to be able to make sure your model can be steered through examples and feedback. So if there's a certain way that a particular common calculation should be done, you want that it should be steerable so that you can just drop that into additional knowledge areas and tell it how to do it. If you're going to be answering the question, how do I'm looking for things that are at risk, which opportunities are at risk? Well, you want to be thinking about, well, how should you define an at-risk opportunity and make sure that there's a way to provide feedback to that to the model so that it can guide that going forward. And then if you've got that, now you've got the pieces in place to do quality, the next thing to do is you want to think about, well, how are you going to build trust? Right? How are you going to make sure that your users, whatever you deploy, that they're going to look at that and going to go, that's a solution that I feel I can really trust. And the number one thing to realize, because we see this error happening, this mistake, this pitfall happening over and over again, is just don't assume that SQL is useful as a way to generate trust with your business users, right? The easiest thing to do is say, well, I'm generating SQL. Let me just show them the SQL statements that I generated. But in reality, most of your business users are not SQL proficient, and then even if they have some basic level SQL proficiency, these models will often generate such complex SQL that reading it requires like an expert level knowledge. So just don't do it, right? Think about, make sure you've got some other ideas. Some things that do work to build trust. The models often have reasoning traces, and if your system can provide that reasoning trace, hey, here's what I did. I went to this table, I used this criteria, I used this knowledge, I then went over here and did this. That is a much easier way for people, much more approachable and a way for people to understand and ground their responses. So it's to trust the responses. So that's a good way to proceed. And then the other way to proceed is to figure out, is there other sourcing, alternative sourcing that they can use to validate independently those results? So maybe there is a dashboard or report out there that, while it doesn't provide the answer very easily, it provides information that's relevant to this question, and therefore a user could look at it and say, well, okay, let me sanity check based on what I'm seeing in this report, based on what I'm seeing everything in my pipeline. Do these answers that I've received about what are the high priority items, do they seem to make sense, right? So that kind of thing is another way to really help users independently ground and generate confidence and trust the results that they get. And then finally, the other big piece is you want to think about evaluation and governance in a proactive way. You don't want to wait until after you've deployed your solution and then try to think about governance after the solution's out the door. Right. Instead, you want to think about, how do you create an evaluation set, maybe a few dozen, maybe 100 types of questions that you're going to push against this, that you can run on a continuous basis through an eval tool. There are all kinds of eval tools out there. There are code-based eval tools. There are no code-based eval tools. But the idea is that you're going to have a set of questions. You're going to run them. You're gonna have a baseline that tells you what these questions what are the correct results. And then anytime you make a change, there's a change in the prompt, there's a change in the model, you added a piece of knowledge, you just go and you have some kind of a system that you push a button, you rerun those evaluations, and then you get back you identify immediately if any of the answers no longer match what was expected in the baseline, right? Which tells you that now some of the steering you've provided is actually pushing some of these questions that you expect to be asked in the wrong direction. And this is critically important. It's the same idea of, like, you wouldn't publish a dashboard without first validating the numbers that are there match other numbers in the system, that they're good. This is that kind of validation step that's required around chat to your data applications. Right? And then you obviously that means that when people publish bots, if you have, let's say, a distributed, a federated environment, and you're not the one publishing these bots, there's different people in the organization, you want to make sure that there's some kind of a process by which you've got that people are consuming these bots in a governed environment, so that then developer can't just push something out that is not validated at all, without having kind of an indication about the level of trust that they have with the data, right? So having a governed space for consuming all the analytics right from the get-go is super important. And what goes hand in hand with that is that you need to have an idea of certification, right? So imagine for a moment, let's say you do have a federated environment and you don't have control over how people are going to publish, right? But you can set standards as a center of excellence as a way to say, well, when you publish, you can designate the three levels of certification, let's say bronze, silver, and gold. And you might say, well, for bronze, it means that the developer has validated that it generates quality answers, right? They put their name on it. They're on the hook if there's a problem, and so that standard is they're accountable for it. But then there's a silver level certification where it has also been vetted independently by the business team, and they've reviewed it and they've said yes, these are trustworthy, correct answers for the types of things that they're supposed to be able to do. So now as a consumer of this particular tool, I have more confidence because I know that not only has it received technical validation, but it's also received business validation. And then there might be a third level, like a gold level, which says, hey, I've got both developer validation, I've got business users that have looked at it and have certified that this looks good, and there is like this extensive automated evaluation set through which this runs that makes sure that against n number of use cases that are well documented, it's always consistently delivering the correct answer. Right, so this is like the gold standard. This is the thing that everyone in enterprise should be able to work with. So now you're creating the stratified list, and I, as a consumer, I might you want to choose to use something that is not as high quality, but I know going into it what to expect, right? I don't assume that it's a gold standard chat your data experience when in fact it's a bronze level. So certification levels, having those standards out of the gate and getting compliance across those when in a published environment, absolutely essential. So let's say you've done that, you've released your initial solution, you've actually got success, people are using it, they're happy with it. There are a few things to consider about how you're then going to expand the ecosystem, right? Because now you only have a narrow solution for a particular target audience and you want to be able to build on that. So the way to think about this is you're going to have over time, you're going to build a set of bots that have a different, or well, maybe it's one bot, but it's a whole bunch of different domains, right? And each domain has a particular scope of analysis. And so that each domain is narrowly focused with a particular well-defined schema, well-defined rules, steerability, etc. So for example, pipeline analysis is one domain, lead generation might be another domain, supply chain efficiency could be a third domain. Each of those can have a separate set of tables, separate set of questions you want to be able to ask. Potentially, there might be overlap over time in terms of the audiences that are addressed, but they're kind of distinct, well-defined areas of analysis, question domains for the user. Then you're going to need to provide routing on top of that. So as a user, I might need to ask a question. Obviously, I don't want to necessarily have to pick which domain I want to look at. It might be obvious that I'm asking about leads. Well, you route it to the right domain through your routing system and make sure that my question comes back. And if it's ambiguous, well, maybe ask both domains and give me the results from both. But having a routing system is an important part from the architecture to be able to scale these kind of solutions out. So you don't just have a one-off POC type thing. And then you want to also allow users to select a domain width when they know exactly what they want. They don't want any ambiguity. They want to ask specifically a question of this particular area. They can click on that domain and ask the question. Right. So over time, an example of an architecture, what it might look like would be something like this, right? So here you see on your right-hand side, you're going to have like a enterprise AI gateway. So this, you can think of this as maybe like a Glean or a Google Agent Space, or I think Amazon has this thing called Q Business Suite that they're rolling out. So it's something that the enterprise is going to use for all manner of AI type questions about all kinds of enterprise knowledge, AI-enabled enterprise search. And there are going to be all kinds of corporate agents over time potentially helping them, creating PowerPoints or building proposals or whatever that might be, right? And that's one place. And you'll want to make sure that the agents that you build in that AI environment, that they can connect to that enterprise AI gateway using standards. And the two standards that are widely adopted in industry today are Model Context Protocol, or MCP, and agent-to-agent protocol. MCP comes out of Anthropic, A2A comes out of Google, and they are the two standards that they work very well together. But those are the two that any of your agents need to adhere to in order to make them pluggable in, so that you don't have a lock-in into some kind of a very specific set of APIs that you can't that make the solution rigid. And then similarly, you're going to have your conversation analytics agent as a gateway, right? And it's again, it should connect to your enterprise AI gateway using your MCP or A2A with a proper security, etc. And then it's going to be able to talk to data that might be in your dashboards. It's going to talk to data that's available in various AI ready data domains, right? And ideas that now I should be able to ask a question. It's going to handle the routing, so that on the right hand side, your AI gateway just knows about all the tools available. Maybe there's one tool related to data. That data tool has all the metadata, all the information around the particular domains that are available. If you want to add a domain, a new application comes online. Now I've got my procurement data up there. All you have to do is register that AI Ray domain to the conversation analytics agent, make sure security is properly applied for it, and then it becomes available for in the architecture moving forward. So you want to think about this kind of a pattern where it's very flexible. It's modular. You can continuously add, and you can evolve over time because, as we know, this space is changing quickly. So, with that, let me hand over to Mike, who's going to show you, just show you a little bit of a demo of kind of how some of these things kind of play out in practice.
Yeah, thanks, Marius. Let me just share my screen here. Okay, so I'm going to show you metric insights here. We have a feature that we call the concierge, which is going to be used for these examples, and it's really acting as that sort of conversational analytics agent that Marius just mentioned in the architecture slide. Um, and also being used as sort of the router, if you like. So the thing that is sort of inferring the intent behind questions, and then either answering the question or perhaps passing it off to another bot that you've built on a particular domain, as Marius has been talking about. Now, a concierge actually is used for a number of different types of BI use cases, not just sort of ask your data type stuff. So it's worth sort of touching on that a little bit, and then how we can route to something like an ask your data bot. So the core of our platform is this idea of a governed catalog for your BI, so that users have one place to come and access sort of certified content, regardless of where that might have been created. And that's essentially what you're looking at here. Each of these tiles is a particular asset that's been certified and put into the catalog. And customers are looking to basically use us to clean up and rationalize their reporting and dashboarding that they make available to users, documenting the assets, and again, adding relevant metadata and certifying them so users know what they can trust. And so, what that creates is this certified catalog where, again, a tile represents a particular BI asset that has been documented with the relevant metadata, so names, descriptions, glossary terms around metrics that we may have within that dashboard, ownership, tagging, whatever it might be. So that it can then be certified at a particular level, in this case, gold certified, and a user coming and accessing that asset then knows that they are accessing that gold certified sales report. Now, where could concierge come into this? Well, search and discoverability is a main use case for customers where they want users to easily be able to find certified content that can help them with their role. So as a user, if I sort of slide out the concierge here on the right hand side, I can ask simple questions around sort of search. So let's pretend I'm a new employee to the organization. I'm responsible for a sales region. Which reports should I look at if I want to analyze our sales numbers? Well, in this case, concierge is going out. It's inferring the intent behind the question is to search for content in this case. And it's going across our catalog and our metadata. It's passing the question and the context to our search engine and metric insights, and it's bringing me back a list of reports and dashboards that might help, in terms of what I was looking for. Now, the key with all these tools is I should be able to go and continue the conversation. So maybe which of these reports are certified. And, again, it's going to go back. It's seen I'm continuing the conversation about search. It's bringing me back a list of certified reports. And I can obviously drill into these regardless of, again, the tool that they've been created in. So search and discoverability is one use for sort of a AI for BI application. We also use it to to provide help. So answering questions either about how to do things within our product or potentially customers uploading FAQs, help around the business in general. So, an example might be how can I subscribe to this report and receive it once a week? So in this case, when I enter a question like that, again, concierge is analyzing the request. It's realized it's a question about usage of the product. It's delving into our help and coming back with an answer. So, that sort of discovery of BI and that help and FAQs is kind of one use case that might be interesting for a BI bot within your organization. Now, let's get to the core use case here around sort of the ask your data use case. So our concierge has the ability to essentially plug into different types of data bots that you might have built or acquired, similar to the ones that Marius was talking about in that landscape slide. And what we're doing in this example is we have plugged into a third-party ask your data bot. And we can start to ask questions that may be inferred in terms of the intent being to answer questions with actual data. So an example might be, what were our sales by product category last quarter? If I just click on that. In this case, it's clear, concierge is clearly going to recognize that I'm asking a data question here. But, it's important to recognize that questions also might be ambiguous. But essentially what it's doing is it's figuring out what the intent behind the question is and passing it off to one or more bots that may be able to provide context and answers to that question. So in this case, what it's done is it said, okay, it looks like a data question, but I've also got some reports that I know can potentially provide context to that question. So it's passed it to the Metric Insights search engine and come back with a set of recommended reports. But it's also passed it off to this data bot that we've integrated, in this case, Wisdom, with the concierge. And that's gone off and done its thing through passing the question through an MCP server, as Marius said. It's analyzing it within Wisdom. It's coming back with the answer from Wisdom that's built on a well-defined domain, as we've been talking about, in this case, sales and opportunities. It's bringing me back the answer. We're then rendering that within this sort of centralized bot, numbers, charting, as Marius said, to deliver the answer. So being able to, again, have a sort of central place to ask these questions, having the necessary tooling to be able to then route those to the appropriate bot on the back end and deliver the answer in one place is kind of critical to the user experience. Let me put another question in here. So obviously, again, the key with these sort of tools is being able to ask follow-on questions. And so let me just do that again. I meant to target it towards Wisdom here. So when I ask a follow-on question, I may choose to direct it to a particular tool in general. So if I know that I want to converse with the data bot itself, I forgot to do this, but I could come in and click on wisdom rather than searching through content like it did in the first phase. Did actually bring me back a table there that may help with me answering these questions, but ultimately it's directed it towards the Ask Your Data bot here. So which sales opportunities have the highest risk right now? If I expand that, I can see the details of what it came back with. So two opportunities that are at high risk because one, the close date looks like it's in the past, so something's going on there. The other, we're looking to close it in the next 30 days, but it's still in a very early stage. So these might be things I go and look at. If I continue the conversation with wisdom, and I'll do it this time, I may say something like, I'm going to the US to meet with the sales team. Which opportunities should I review with them? Again, I'm going to direct it directly towards the Ask Your Data bot in this case, because I want a data answer there, and so again, it's going to pass that question off to, in this case, Wisdom through their MCP server. Again, Wisdom's probably going to do a deeper analysis this time in terms of looking through our sales domain that we've defined over there, coming up with answers. The more complex the question, the longer these tools can take to generate answers, but it's going to go through the process and again deliver me something back through the MCP server that we can render within the concierge directly and keep the user experience consistent for our users. And while this is doing the analysis there, something that Marius spoke about with the slides and that's critical is sort of the context and steerability of these sort of domains and questions that we're asking. And I just want to bring up an example of what we mean by that as that's processing on the back end. So, in the examples that we've been going through, we're talking about sort of sales and opportunities in a retail environment in our case. And I asked two questions there. One was about sort of which opportunities should I focus on, and the other was around high risk opportunities. Now, if I didn't provide any sort of context or steerability on that, these models that we're using are very generic models. They're going to answer that potentially without any context around what the company is and what we're doing and what might constitute a high risk opportunity. Something in this retail example that's high risk could be very different to an opportunity for us as a enterprise software company selling software. So providing this context and steerability, things like, when a manager asks which opportunities they should focus on, what should it steer them towards, right? At risk opportunities with planned close dates in the next 60 days, largest dollar opportunities in the pipeline. You need to steer it towards things that are relevant and contextual to your business. Similarly, what constitutes a high risk opportunity? Give it some context that makes sense for your business in order for it to come back with an answer that is credible and not so generic that it really doesn't help the user who's asking the question in the first place. And so when it comes back with questions like this, I'm going to meet the US team, which opportunities should I focus on? I'm getting context with a sensible reason that makes sense within my business and within the business that we're running here. So, a very quick demo of how sort of something like this might materialize. Again, the key points being you need, well, a high level, you might have an enterprise tool, as Marius said, something like Glean that is dealing with lots of different bots across your organization. That needs to be able to pass questions off to something like our concierge, where we're providing the answers from a BI perspective. That concierge is also integrating with other domain-specific bots that you've built that can answer data-specific questions for those domains. So with that, I guess, Marius, any final thoughts on the stuff that we've covered?
Yeah, so I mean, just thanks for the demo, Mike. So I think you kind of softened the demo, a little bit of what we do, but I think the important thing, the BT takeaways for you guys are going to be really to think about what you need to do to kind of expand the bot ecosystem. What are the big takeaways? Just to review those. Start with something very narrow and well defined. Do not boil the ocean. Find something where there's a lot of value and generate, show a win there and then expand from there. Second thing is you do need, even though you're starting small with one piece, make sure you have an architecture and plan for how all the pieces are going to fit together as you build these additional data domains and bring them in, right? So like not having any idea of how to do that just means that you're going to create this like scattered ecosystem where it's going to be very difficult to put things together later, right? You want to have the right architecture, the right things connected via MCP, all the things that are going to make it scalable. But at the same time, when you look at the architecture, you want to make sure that you have the ability to pull components in and out. So, your tools and models are going to be rapidly evolving. New entrants are going to come into play. So you want to make, this is a quickly because it's such a fast changing space, you want to make sure that you've got an architecture that has this pluggability. And again, leveraging MCP and A2A will allow you to do that. So be sure that it's grounded in that. And then if you do build incrementally, and if you also manage expectations, that is, have users understand that you're not delivering ChatGPT for their data, for everything in the enterprise, that you're delivering these specific solutions that are going to generate value for these specific constituencies because they do something, make it easier for them to do something that they can't do today easily with their existing reporting. That will be the key takeaway, and it's really about thinking about this in terms of like this is not AI instead of BI, right? It's really AI supplementing the BI that you already have. The dashboards are not going to go away, not at least not anywhere in the foreseeable future. So you need to be able to provide solutions that kind of provide another layer of value on top of all the things that are already there and work well with those solutions. So I guess, Mike, we have a few minutes for questions, right? Very
Yeah, so
little
we got
time.
like 3 minutes left. So let's answer a couple of questions here, and if we don't get to them, we'll follow up afterwards with answers. So let's see. Do you see the same AI-ready data domains feeding data into the dashboards?
So if you think about kind of what would be a best practice model, it would be, create a semantic model that which whatever semantic modeling tool you want to use, but you create a semantic model that is fully ready, and then have that same semantic model be consumed by both your AI solution, your conversational analytics solution, and your dashboard solution, right? And not have lots of any or really any supplemental or additional rules baked into the dashboard itself that are not already in the semantic model. So that'd be fantastic if you can do that, right? Because then you are guaranteeing that both are working off the same foundation. Now, in reality, enterprise scenarios are messy, and you have an existing set of dashboards already out there, and maybe you may or may not have an existing semantic model that's shared across those dashboards and that's clean, that has all logic. You probably have some dashboards where people are using or have built logic directly, encoded that directly into the dashboard. So you've got to really look at the reality of what you have on the ground and ask the question, well, to what extent can you leverage the same data? If you can't, how are you going to minimize duplication of effort and have a strategy that takes you to the point where eventually they can be unified? So that might mean that you put on the roadmap the fact that, hey, I'm building this AI for BI solution. It's covering the scope. I've got these dashboards that have a bunch of encoded logic in them. I'm going to create a semantic model where everything is built into that model. And then once that's done, I'm going to have a project to move those BI dashboards to use that model and take out all the logic out of the hard coding that's there in place, right? So that would be like a strategy to get to that pristine place over time. Right? So you have to take pragmatic approach.
Okay, we got 1 minute here, Marius. So maybe a quick answer to this one. How do you take care of row-level security in your
That's a
bots?
that's a
Can
hard
you
one
do
for
it
a
in one
minute, but
minute?
let me do it
Yes.
in a minute.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
row level security, this is definitely something you've got to look at carefully because a lot of the tools and capabilities are not necessarily there for it. There are two ways to think about this. One is that you can delegate the user login itself. So in other words, you can use OAuth, for instance, such that when you log in through MCP or however you logging in into the underlying sort of bot that's handling the talk to your data questions, you are doing that through the using the user's credentials, right? Through OAuth, they're authenticating, and thereby row-level security is handled through that login. That bot performs everything as that user, and the row-level security is guaranteed that way. That's one approach. The second approach is using more of like a tokenized or trusted type relationship where you tell the bot that you're calling to say, this is the user that I'm using. And then it has within it built-in row-level security maps that it applies to tables and further restricts the data. It's probably we're running out of time, so I can't
Yeah,
discuss
yeah,
like which way we
yeah,
go, but those are
yeah.
the two ways to think about it.
Sounds good. Well, I know we're at the top of the hour, so thanks everyone for your time. Hope you found this useful. We'll send out the recording. Next session is on the 20th of August, where we're going to be talking about more of the BI governance piece and essentially sort of cleaning up the BI mess across different tools and technologies that you might have, how you can, look for duplicate content, overlapping content, obsolete content, and set up a well-governed environment. But thanks everyone for joining. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.